Inside Emerald Haven Wildlife Park, a zookeeper crossed the line, mistreating a baby chimpanzee for the sake of entertaining visitors. What he didn't realize was that among those visitors was none other than Shaquille O'Neal. The vast parking lot of Emerald Haven Wildlife Park stretched out, nearly empty on a quiet Tuesday morning. A few school buses sat in their designated spots, their bright yellow paint standing out against the asphalt. The entrance sign loomed high, casting a long shadow over the vacant lot. Shaquille O'Neal, better known to the world as Shaq, stepped out of his car, blending in as much as a 7-foot legend could. Dressed casually, with a brown hat pulled low, he wasn't looking for attention. Phone pressed to his ear, he locked his car with a beep. "Yeah, I just got here," he said, his deep voice cutting through the stillness. "I know it's early, but I'm trying to get this wrapped up fast." From the other end, a friend's voice crackled with apology. "Man, sorry about the last-minute invite, Shaq, but you know how rare these reunions are. It's not every day we get the NBA legends together like this." Shaq exhaled, his steps slowing as he neared the entrance. There was a weight in his voice, one that came from knowing he was caught between two obligations. I know, once-in-a-lifetime thing. That's why I'm trying to push this zoo meeting up. But I made a commitment, you feel me?" His friend's tone softened. "We get it, big man. Just do what you can." It'd mean a lot to have you there, sharing stories, reliving the old days. As Shaq approached the gate, a staff member waiting by the entrance straightened up, eyes widening. "Look, I gotta go," Shaq said quickly. "I'll try to make it, even if I'm late." He ended the call, shifting his focus back to the moment at hand. The staffer stammered, clearly not expecting to see a basketball icon in their quiet zoo. "And Mr. O'Neal, we weren't expecting you for a few more hours." Shaq gave an easy smile. "Yeah, plans changed. Thought I'd try my luck coming early." The employee hesitated, reaching for the walkie-talkie clipped to their belt. "I see, the owner is at the vet clinic right now. Let me just check." While they radioed in, Shaq's mind drifted back to the reunion. A room full of legends, swapping stories, laughing about old games. It was a rare thing. And missing even a part of it stung. He could turn around right now, drive straight there. But that wasn't how he rolled. When Shaq gave his word, he followed through. "All right, Mr. O'Neal, if you'll follow me, I'll take you to the clinic," the staffer said, snapping him back to reality. Walking through the park, Shaq took in the morning stillness. A few zookeepers moved about, tending to their tasks. Distant animal calls echoed, a tropical bird, the low rumble of a big cat. It was peaceful, a far cry from the packed arenas and buzzing cities he was used to. The staffer, clearly nervous in his presence, tried to make small talk. "So, first time at our zoo, Mr. O'Neal?" Shaq shook his head. "Yeah, first time. Heard good things, though." The employee brightened. "Oh, absolutely. We may not be the biggest, but we take pride in our animal care and conservation efforts." Shaq nodded, only half listening as his thoughts wandered back to the reunion. Who was gonna be there? What stories were waiting to be told? Legends, all in one place. It wasn't something that happened often. He made a mental note, wrap this up quick. They rounded a corner, and a small, clinical-looking building came into view. "Here we are, the vet clinic," the staffer said, gesturing to the entrance. The moment Shaq stepped inside, the contrast hit him. The outside world was all nature, fresh air. Here, fluorescent lighting cast a sterile glow. Equipment lined the walls, neatly arranged. At the reception desk, an employee did a double take at the sight of him. "Mr. O'Neal is here to see Mr. Gallagher," the staffer explained. The receptionist nodded, picking up a phone to make the call. But Shaq's attention had already been pulled elsewhere. Through a large glass window, he could see into an adjacent treatment room. A suited man, who Shaq assumed was the zoo owner, stood next to a veterinarian in a white coat. But it wasn't them that held his gaze. It was the tiny chimpanzee lying motionless on the examination table. Shaq moved closer to the glass, watching intently as the veterinarian, a young woman, carefully administered an injection. His eyes narrowed. Something about the scene felt off. And in the pit of his stomach, a slow, simmering anger began to rise. Because something told him this wasn't just a routine checkup. The moment Shaq laid eyes on the tiny chimpanzee, something inside him shifted. The vulnerability of the little primate hit him harder than he expected, a wave of concern washing over him. "Mr. O'Neill?" The receptionist's voice barely registered. "I can show you to the waiting area if you'd like." But Shaq didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on the scene behind the glass, his brow furrowing as he watched the veterinarian and the zoo owner at work. Something about the way they handled the animal, it kept him rooted in place. What had happened to this little chimp? Why did it need medical attention? Inside the treatment room, the vet finished administering an injection. When she finally looked up, her entire body tensed. She had spotted him. Her eyes went wide, and she quickly tapped the owner on the shoulder. The man in the suit turned, following her gaze, eyebrows raising in surprise as he saw Shaq staring back at them. Without hesitation, he stripped off his gloves, washed his hands, and stepped out of the room. Moments later, he was in the reception area, extending a hand. "Mr. O'Neill," he greeted smoothly. "Martin Gallagher. I wasn't expecting you for another couple of hours." Shaq reluctantly tore his eyes away from the chimp, shaking the man's hand. "Yeah, sorry about that. Had a schedule change, figured I'd try to move our meeting up." Martin's smile was polite, but tight. A quick glance at his staff confirmed that this was unexpected. "I see. Well, I wasn't informed of your early arrival. We could have been better prepared." The young receptionist looked anxious. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Gallagher. I just got the call from the front desk that Mr. O'Neill had arrived, but you were in the middle of treatment, and I didn't want to interrupt." Martin held up a hand, silencing the flustered employee. "It's all right. What's done is done." Turning back to Shaq, he regained his professional demeanor, though the tension lingered. "I apologize for the confusion, Mr. O'Neill. As you can see, we were in the middle of treating one of our animals." Shaq gave a slow nod, glancing back at the chimp. "Yeah, I saw. The little guy okay?" Martin followed his gaze. "Oh yes, nothing serious. Just a routine checkup and vitamin booster. Young primates, much like human children, have weaker immune systems, so we take extra precautions." Shaq nodded, feeling a bit more at ease. "That's good to hear. Nice to see you're hands-on with the animal care, not just leaving it all to the staff." Martin's smile softened at the compliment. "Thank you. We take great pride in our dedication to the animal's well-being." Gesturing toward the door, he continued, "Shall we step outside? The little one is resting now, so we try to keep things quiet." As they exited into the crisp morning air, Shaq felt a mix of emotions, relief that the chimp seemed okay, admiration for the level of care he had witnessed, but also the pressing thought of his NBA reunion ticking closer with every passing minute. Martin, seemingly oblivious to Shaq's internal dilemma, began explaining. "As you can see, Mr. O'Neill, we take a very hands-on approach to animal care here at Emerald Haven. It's something we're quite proud of." Shaq nodded, scanning the nearby enclosures. "That's great. I've always been a big believer in personal involvement." But Martin's expression darkened slightly. "That said, we do have our fair share of challenges. As a mid-sized facility, we struggle to compete with larger zoos in the state. Maintaining this level of care without the resources they have, it's not easy." Shaq exhaled, already running potential solutions through his mind. "I get it. So about our meeting, any chance we can move it up? I've got an important event later." But Martin shook his head, the answer firm. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. O'Neill, but I'm afraid that won't be possible. I have scheduled meetings with local reporters, plus several animal care duties that can't be postponed. I know your time is valuable, but I hope you understand." Shaq wasn't used to hearing no, but here he was. He felt a twinge of frustration thinking about the reunion, but he reminded himself he had made a commitment. With a small sigh, he forced a nod. "I understand. No worries. I guess I'll just take a look around on my own for a bit, if that's okay." Martin looked relieved. "Absolutely. Please, explore at your own pace. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask our staff. We'll meet at the originally planned time in my office. I'll have someone escort you there." With that, Martin hurried off, disappearing into the park. Shaq adjusted his brown hat, exhaling as he found himself alone in the quiet atmosphere of the zoo. A few school groups wandered in the distance, preschoolers clutching their teachers' hands as they moved between exhibits. For the first time in a long time, Shaq felt like just another tourist. He took his time walking, enjoying the anonymity that the early hour provided. But as he wandered between enclosures, a strange feeling crept in. Something wasn't right. At first, it was just little things, minor details that didn't sit well with him. And the more he looked, the more he noticed. As Shaq continued his walk through the zoo, something gnawed at him. At first glance, everything seemed well maintained, the enclosures were clean, the pathways orderly. But as he looked closer, a different picture emerged. The animals. Many of them seemed off. Listless. Too skinny. Their eyes dull, their movements sluggish. It was a stark contrast to the polished image of exceptional care that Martin had painted. Shaq frowned, recalling Martin's comments about financial struggles. He had read before that zoos rarely thrived on ticket sales alone. Many relied on government grants, donations, and sponsorships just to keep the lights on. Without that extra support, cutting corners became inevitable. And the more Shaq saw, the more conflicted he felt. He could tell that the staff cared. That much was clear. But caring and having the resources to provide the best possible life for these animals were two very different things. Lost in thought, he found himself near the primate section, stopping in front of the chimpanzee enclosure. He watched as several mother chimps played with their young, the bonds between them clear as day, even across species. There was something deeply human about the way they interacted. But then Shaq's focus shifted. The space. The enclosure itself was clean, sure. But it was too small. These animals needed room to move, to roam, to be. They didn't seem outwardly distressed, but to Shaq, the problem was obvious. The limited space was holding them back. A loud burst of chatter snapped him out of his thoughts. A group of preschoolers had just arrived, led by a young teacher in his early 30s. He was doing his best to keep the kids together, herding them like a one-man defensive line. "All right, everyone. Let's stay together," the teacher started, but then his voice trailed off. His eyes landed on Shaq. For a split second, he looked stunned, clearly recognizing the basketball icon, despite the casual tourist disguise. Shaq braced himself. Here it comes. The whispers. The excitement. The inevitable wave of attention that followed him everywhere. But to his surprise, the teacher pulled himself together instantly. Instead of making a scene, he approached Shaq with quiet respect. "Excuse me," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Travis. I hope I'm not bothering you, but I just wanted to say, I'm a big fan, Mr. O'Neill. Don't worry, I won't make a fuss or anything. I know how valuable a little peace and quiet can be." Shaq smiled, shaking Travis's hand. "Man, I appreciate that. You seem like you know a thing or two about needing some quiet time yourself." Travis chuckled, nodding toward the excited kids. "Oh, you have no idea. But I wouldn't trade it for anything." After a beat, he hesitated. "Say, would you mind if we got a quick photo? Just for me, no posting, no fuss." Shaq respected that. "Sure thing." They took a quick selfie, and Shaq even signed Travis's hat at his request. As Travis was about to head back to his students, he paused. "Oh, by the way, there's a chimpanzee show starting in about 15 minutes. It's supposed to be educational, all about how smart they are and how similar they are to us. Might be worth checking out. Shaq nodded. Good looking out. Thanks, man. As Travis returned to his students, Shaq glanced at his watch. He still had an hour before his rescheduled meeting with Martin. The idea of an educational program about chimps intrigued him. He'd always been fascinated by their intelligence. Besides, it would kill some time. Just as he was about to head that way, his phone rang. Pulling it from his pocket, he checked the screen. His friend. Shaq sighed, stepping away from the enclosure before answering. Hey, man. Shaq. You on your way? His voice carried a hint of regret. Looks like I won't make it on time. Couldn't move up the meeting here, but I'll definitely be there, even if I'm late. There was a pause. Then, a sigh. All right, big man. We'll save you a seat. Just get here when you can. After ending the call, Shaq made his way toward the showroom. If he was stuck waiting, he might as well learn something. Plus, with most people focused on the show, he was less likely to get recognized. As he neared the entrance, he saw groups of students from at least 3 different schools streaming in. The crowd was a little chaotic, so he decided to hang back and let things settle. His mind drifted to the little chimp from the clinic. Was it okay now? Resting? Eating? He barely noticed Travis and his preschoolers arriving again until the teacher appeared at his side. Sir, Travis said quietly, careful not to draw attention. Fancy seeing you here again. Thinking of catching the show? Shaq nodded, grateful for the guy's continued discretion. Yeah, thought it might be interesting. You bringing your class in? Travis grinned. Absolutely. First time our school has taken a field trip here. I hope the kids enjoy learning about how intelligent chimps are. There was a brief pause before he added, all right, I better get them inside. You coming? Shaq gave a small smile. Yeah, I'll stay in the back row. Travis nodded knowingly and discreetly guided Shaq to a seat in the far corner of the room. The place buzzed with excitement. Kids chatted eagerly, bouncing in their seats, waiting for the show to begin. Shaq leaned back, arms crossed. At first, he was just planning to sit through this, pass the time. But something told him this wasn't going to be just another animal show. And he had no idea what was about to unfold. The room buzzed with anticipation as teachers did their best to maintain order, their voices mixing with the scattered murmurs of tourists filling the remaining seats. The crowd was diverse, families, students, and solo visitors, all waiting for the chimpanzee show to begin. Shaq, seated discreetly in the back, pulled out his phone. Killing time, he started casually browsing articles about chimpanzees. But what began as idle curiosity quickly took a darker turn. One article caught his attention. A report detailing how human respiratory viruses could spread to primates, even great apes. It explained how zoos had to be extra cautious since these viruses could cause serious health issues in captive populations. Shaq's brow furrowed as he read, his thoughts drifting back to the young chimpanzee he had seen in the clinic earlier. Could that little one have been suffering from something like this? He made a mental note. When he met Martin later, he was going to ask. The lights dimmed. Shaq put his phone away. A zookeeper, a man in his mid-30s with a friendly, practiced smile, stepped onto the stage. Good morning, everyone, he called out with enthusiasm. I'm Gregory Mathers, but you can all call me Greg. Welcome to our program, Primate Wonders, a journey into intelligence. The show started promisingly. Greg shared fascinating facts about chimpanzee behavior, their intelligence, their ability to use tools. But then, the tone changed. And now, let me introduce you to our star performer. Mello. Greg gestured toward the side of the stage as a small chimpanzee was led out. Shaq stiffened. He knew that chimp. His eyes locked onto Mello, recognition sparking in his mind. It was the same baby chimp he had seen in the clinic earlier. The same intelligent eyes. The same wary expression. No way, he thought. They wouldn't put a sick animal in a show, right? He squinted, trying to get a clearer view from the back of the room. Maybe he was overthinking it. Maybe all baby chimps looked similar from a distance. But as the show went on, that uneasy feeling in Shaq's gut only grew stronger. The educational presentation began to shift. The fun facts about chimpanzee intelligence faded, replaced by something off. Mello was on a leash. The little chimp was made to perform tricks, riding a tricycle, waving to the audience, balancing on balls. It wasn't playful. It wasn't natural. And it wasn't right. Shaq watched closely. The more he observed, the more uncomfortable he became. The chimp's movements were sluggish, reluctant. He wasn't performing willingly, he was compelled. Greg, noticing some kids losing interest, escalated things. He introduced games like hide-and-seek and peekaboo, intentionally startling the baby chimp to get exaggerated reactions for the audience's amusement. Shaq's jaw clenched. This wasn't education. This was exploitation. And then he saw it. Mello's eyes, fluttering, closed every few seconds. His movements becoming slower. His reactions less engaged, more agitated. The chimp was tired. Sick. Shaq sat up straighter, his sharp gaze locked on Mello. The next part of the show made his blood boil. Greg announced that the children would now get a chance to feed the chimpanzees. The room buzzed with excitement as little hands clutched pieces of fruit, eager to interact with the star of the show. Shaq didn't move. He just watched. Mello sat stiffly on the presentation table, his small frame hunched, his eyes darting warily as the kids approached. One child, no older than 5, extended a piece of fruit. Mello barely glanced at it before turning his head away. The boy tried again, nudging the fruit closer. Mello let out a soft grunt, almost a whimper, and shifted even further back. Shaq's hands clenched into fists. He wasn't imagining this. That hesitation, the clear lack of appetite, the sluggish movements, it all felt too familiar. Then Mello did something that sent a chill down Shaq's spine. The little chimp glanced briefly at the other chimps in the enclosure, then crossed his arms. A deeply human-like gesture. One of frustration. Of defiance. Shaq's mind raced. He'd seen this chimp before. He knew it. And this wasn't just any baby chimp, this was the same one that had been in the clinic earlier. So why the hell was it up on stage, being forced to perform? He couldn't stay quiet. Shaq stood up. Even in the dim room, his towering presence commanded immediate attention. Hey! His deep voice cut through the chatter like a blade. What's going on here? That chimp looked sick. Greg, startled by the sudden interruption, squinted into the audience. Sir, please sit down. You're disrupting the show. Shaq wasn't backing down. That animal doesn't look well. This isn't right. You need to stop. You're putting the kids and the chimp at risk. Greg's expression hardened. I told you to calm down, sir. You're the one making the children and animals uncomfortable. Shaq shot a look toward Travis, the only teacher in the room who recognized him. What are you waiting for? Get the kids out of here. That chimp is distressed. Travis hesitated only a second before snapping into action. All right, kids, back to your seats. Now. The room dissolved into chaos. Teachers rushed to corral their students. Some kids started crying, startled by the sudden tension in the air. And then Greg made a mistake. Security, he barked. We have a disruptive visitor, escort him out. 2 security guards began pushing through the crowd toward Shaq. But before they could reach him, a sharp, panicked screech echoed through the room. Mello had had enough. The baby chimp reacted instinctively, yanking back against the leash, flailing in distress. And in that moment, Shaq knew. This wasn't just about a show anymore. This was about something much bigger. As the room erupted in chaos, children grew frightened, and teachers struggled to regain control. Shaq, though frustrated, allowed himself to be led out by security, his mind racing. Something was very wrong here. Outside the showroom, he faced two burly guards. Their stern expressions softened as they recognized him, but their tone remained firm. "Sir, this is a children's show. If you can't enjoy it quietly, you'll have to leave." Before Shaq could respond, Martin Gallagher, the zoo owner, approached. Seeing Shaq, his expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Mr. O'Neill, is everything all right?" The security guards, now realizing who they had just confronted, looked mortified. "We're so sorry, Mr. O'Neill. We didn't realize." Shaq waved them off. "It's not you I'm worried about. It's what's happening in that showroom. That chimp, Mello, something's not right." Martin's face paled. "I assure you, Mr. O'Neill, our animals receive the best care." "Then explain why that baby chimp looks sedated," Shaq pressed, his voice low but firm. "Why it's chained up and forced to perform when it's clearly not well." Martin glanced around, aware of the growing crowd. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," he suggested. Shaq hesitated but nodded, knowing a direct confrontation wouldn't get him far. He followed Martin to his office, the tension palpable. Once inside, Martin closed the door and turned to Shaq. "I had no idea Greg was using such methods in the show," he said, trying to sound sincere. "I promise you, I'll take immediate action against him." Shaq steadied him. "It's not just Greg. I've been around the zoo all morning. The enclosures look fine, but the animals, many of them are too thin, too listless. They need more space. Better care." Martin sighed, his shoulders sagging. "You're right. We're struggling financially. We need donor support to make real improvements." Shaq nodded, recalling the financial challenges zoos often faced. "I get that," he said. "But drugging animals for entertainment? That's crossing a line." "Mello wasn't drugged," Martin insisted. "We only gave him a vitamin booster. But young chimps are prone to illness. Maybe he wasn't fit to perform. I'll make sure this never happens again." Shaq was quiet for a long moment, then reached for his checkbook. "I'll trust you on this, Martin. But no more exploitative shows. Focus on education. Teach people about these animals." Relief washed over Martin's face as Shaq handed over the check. But then, his demeanor changed slightly. "Mr. O'Neill, since you arrived early, our press team isn't here yet. Would you mind waiting? The exposure would be invaluable." Shaq checked his watch, feeling the weight of the NBA reunion he was missing. "I really need to go, Martin." Martin looked disappointed but quickly recovered. "Understood. Would you at least take a quick photo for our social media?" Shaq hesitated, then nodded. "One photo. Then I'm out." After the snapshot, Martin escorted him to the exit, thanking him profusely. As Shaq got into his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. But he had done what he could. It was time to move on. Or so he thought. Halfway to the exit, he realized he'd left his tourist hat behind. He debated leaving it but felt a nagging pull to return. Heading back, he noticed Martin and his team were no longer at the entrance. As he approached the showroom, voices inside caught his attention. Then he heard it. Martin's voice, tense with anger. "Do you have any idea what could have happened if the press or animal agencies saw those chains?" Greg, defensive, replied, "I thought the sedative wouldn't be enough to keep Mello docile. We needed the chains." Martin snapped, "That's the problem, Greg. You didn't think. Next time, increase the dose of acipromazine. We can't risk another incident." Shaq felt his blood run cold. They knew. They were drugging the animals. And they planned to keep doing it. Stepping into the doorway, his imposing frame cast a shadow over them. "There won't be a next time." Martin and Greg spun around, their faces twisting with shock and fear. "Mr. O'Neill," Martin stammered, scrambling to regain control. I can explain." But Shaq had already pulled out his phone. "Save it. I heard everything. And I'm calling the press right now." Greg lunged as if to stop him, but Martin held him back. "Don't be hasty, Mr. O'Neill," Martin said, his voice shifting into something darker. "You have no proof. It's your word against ours. And who do you think the authorities will believe? A respected zoo owner or a basketball player sticking his nose where it doesn't belong?" Shaq paused. Martin was right. Without proof, it would be hard to take them down. But then his eyes fell on Mello, still in his cage. The little chimp looked worse than before, barely keeping his eyes open. Shaq's grip on his phone tightened. He started snapping pictures. The chains. The chimp's lethargic state. The guilt plastered across Martin and Greg's faces. "What do you think you're doing?" Greg shouted, moving toward him. Shaq sidestepped effortlessly, his years on the court kicking in. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he warned. "Unless you want to add assault to your list of problems." Martin's mask slipped completely. "You have no idea who you're messing with, O'Neill." Shaq fixed him with a cold stare. "No, Martin. You made the mistake. You thought you could get away with this. But it ends now." Without another word, he turned and walked out. Word of the confrontation had already spread. As Shaq moved through the zoo, murmurs and stares followed him. Reaching the parking lot, he saw news vans arriving, protesters gathering with hastily made signs. Inside his car, he pulled out his phone. "Derek," he typed to his assistant. "Sending photos and videos. Urgent. Animal abuse at Emerald Haven. Get this to our lawyers and media contacts ASAP. Also, start looking into reputable sanctuaries. We need to get these animals out." A reply came instantly. "On it, boss. But you need to get out of there fast." He looked up. Reporters were already heading toward his car, cameras flashing. As he started the engine, he noticed a familiar face, Travis, the teacher, standing near the school buses. Their eyes met. Travis gave him a small, knowing nod. A silent thank you. Shaq returned it. As he pulled onto the road, his phone rang. It was his friend from the NBA reunion. "Big man, we saw the news. You coming?" Shaq sighed, a mix of regret and resolve. "Yeah, but I'll be late. You wouldn't believe the day I've had. We saw something about a zoo. What happened?" Shaq's voice grew serious. "Stumbled onto something bad. Animal abuse. Couldn't walk away from it." Silence. Then, "Damn. That's heavy. But you did the right thing, Shaq. We're proud of you." Shaq smiled, gripping the wheel. "Thanks, man. Trust me, I've got one hell of a story to tell when I get there." As he drove, the weight of responsibility settled on him. But it wasn't a burden. It was a purpose. This wasn't just about basketball or business. This was about making a difference. And he was ready.